Shakespeare, there's a new dead guy in town. That's right, Moliere is breaking Bill from Avon's monopoly on summer theater in the park. Don't know much about this 17th century French playwright who once said, the most effective way of attacking vice is to expose it to ridicule? You're not alone. Here to tell us more about Moliere and why he's the wig-wearing, tubercular satirist these trying times demand is Lucie Tiberghein, director of this year's performance of The Misanthrope, and actress Mandi Masden. Welcome to the show, you guys.
Thank you very much.
So I'm starting with the baseline assumption that a lot of people don't know who Moliere is. So Lucie, maybe you can give us a little bit of background.
Sure. So Moliere is a 17th century playwright. He is the most well-known playwright of the French language. He is still performed all the time. I think he's the playwright that's the most performed at the Comédie Française still today. He wrote maybe, I would say, about 30 plays. He started being very inspired by Commedia dell'arte, an Italian farce. And then he started to write much more sort of psychologically inspired or in-depth comedies. He was both loved and extremely criticized by sort of the ruling class because his sort of mission in life was to expose the hypocrisy or the power structure of French society. And in many ways, I think every question his plays ask resonate still quite a lot these days.
He was writing during the reign of Louis XIV, and many of his plays are sort of set either in court or around court and take on the social mores of the time. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Yes, absolutely.
And Mandi, had you read or performed any Moliere before coming on board for this production?
I did. I'd read a couple in high school, and I'd seen a few in grad school and kind of after grad school. It's always very interesting, and he's very funny. And I think a lot of people don't realize how funny it is. But I know School for Wives is hilarious. It's so timely still that it's just kind of amazing. And I think that's why he keeps getting performed over and over again.
Mm-hmm. So this is the inaugural season of Moliere in the Park. And by the park, we mean our own Prospect Park. And it's going to be a staged reading of The Misanthrope. So Mandi, maybe you can tell us a little bit about this play and the role that you play in it.
Well, I play Eliant. Mm-hmm. I think The Misanthrope, is the most popular one that's done of his plays. And it kind of circles around Alceste and his disdain for the court and everything that has to do with the court. He's very against hypocrisy, and he's very against like kind of the mores of how things are done. So it's kind of him flailing out against the system at hand, and he gets in a bit of trouble for it later on in the play. But it's mostly about that.
I think what's interesting about the play is that he not only criticizes hypocrisy in at the court, but sort of in general in mankind. The irony is that he is madly in love with Célimène, who is sort of the queen of sociability.
The biggest hypocrite of all, some might say.
In many ways. What I love is, to me, the play, in a way, is very feminist in the sense that I think what's at the core of it is that she, in order to remain independent as a woman in society, is also having to play by certain rules. She does not have the choice of moral absolutism the way that he does as a man in this society. So I like to think of the play as being also very much about her and about the choices that people who don't have that kind of privilege have to make.
And who is Eliant, your character in this?
It's her cousin, and she's kind of more of a middle ground. She's kind of in the center. She has more of a moral, I don't want to say high ground, but she doesn't exist in a world of extremism.
Exactly.
Right? So she kind of exists in the center.
Exactly.
How are we supposed to feel about this main character? I mean, the play is called The Misanthrope.
Yes.
Is there judgment? Is there authorial judgment about his moral absolutism?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think over time, in all the productions that have happened, he is either sort of ridiculed for his extremism, or he made a hero for his ability for his quest for honesty. Mm-hmm. I think that really a good production would allow both things to be true, and would allow would take a look at what it means to be all of that at once. And that's where I think Moliere is so extraordinary, is that he criticizes and loves at the same time, and himself was always pulled between a desire to share his love of mankind and also ask all of us to reach a level of honesty and generosity that he expected of himself.
And Lucie, you've mentioned that you feel like Moliere is extremely resonant today, and that he's actually quite Brooklyn in a way. Will you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, people often ask me why Moliere, why now?
I'll just cross that question off the list. Then.
Yeah. Well, I think that he's both funny, he's subversive, he's embracing of all types of people, and in many ways that feels like Brooklyn to me. And that's why I've become sort of in love with this idea that Moliere is, if Moliere were alive today, he'd live in Brooklyn.
Brooklynites are a little bit, we're the center of the universe. Of course he would live here.
I think he's a popular playwright, but I think popular in the sense that he's close to the people, and he is in love with the people, and I think that we live in an incredibly rich, diverse community, and I think that he. I'm really interested in bringing his work to that community, and in that community being able to see itself reflected in his work.
Lucie, did you grow up in France?
I did.
I'm curious to hear more about sort of how Moliere is viewed in France, because, here in the U.S., Shakespeare, in the 90s, we had a teen film based on Taming of the Shrew starring Julia Stiles. You know what I mean? Is Moliere sort of viewed that way in France?
That's a good question. So, yes, he's done all the time. As I said, he's studied in school. Everybody who goes through the French public school system will have studied at least one or two or three of his plays. In France, they're very interested in this sort of, the fun aspects of Moliere, but also the deeper, more psychological, more subversive, darker aspect. I mean, I think Moliere himself was both an incredibly dark human being and somebody full of joy, and I think that the darker aspects of his work are very much explored in a lot of the productions in France, while remaining comedies or even farces. Here, they tend to, the ones I've seen, tend to live in the world of comedy and farce more without exploring the deeper, darker aspects of it. So I would say that's the main difference.
When they directed in France, do they play with, do directors play with interpretations of like place and time the way that they do with Shakespeare here?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah. Some are placed at the time, and a lot of them are very contemporary.
An Afro-futurist Tartuffe.
Yeah, sure.
Let's make it happen.
That would kind of be amazing.
You mentioned that a lot of his work is grounded in commedia, and often I feel like when there is heightened language that people are like, oh, this isn't going to be approachable, I'm not going to understand it.
Yeah.
This idea of having sort of these broad characters or stock characters who people might be able to identify with can be comforting. Are there characters in the Misanthrope that are sort of these broad stock characters that you might find?
Not really. And I would say that earlier in his career, Moliere worked with those characters, but then really moved away from that, and wrote in a more almost wrote characters and stories that had more complexity and more psychology in them. That's not to say that it's hard to identify yourself. I think on the contrary, the humanity of every one of his characters allows us to see ourselves reflected in them. I really believe that.
And so this is a staged reading, once again, of The Misanthrope.
Yeah.
It's going to be May 18th through 20th?
Correct.
In Prospect Park?
Correct. So we're doing three nights. Our first night on the 18th is a sort of inaugural celebratory event that is also a fundraiser for our 2020 production. And on the 19th and 20th, we'll be doing these two readings of the full play. And we have an incredible cast, Samira Wiley being one of them, Mandi Masden being another one of them, Jenny Mudge, Chris Coffey, Pastel Pringle, Tamara Sevuns, and I think that's it for now.
We say it's a reading. Is it a staged reading? Can we expect full Louis Couture's costumes?
I don't think you can expect that, but it's I think would say it's a stylized reading. I think that's fair to say.
Yeah.
I think we'll be up, we'll be interacting, but we will have our scripts and we'll be out and about music stands. So
Yeah.
it will not be a mounted production.
Okay.
Yeah.
And if people want to find out more information, do you want to point them to?
MoliereInThePark.org. Everything's up there on our website. I think that's the best way to find out about all of our upcoming events.
Great. And we should mention that it's free.
Yes,
It's
it's
$0.
$0.
And you can bring a picnic basket
Yep.
and wine as long as it's in a designated container.
Yes.
Tremendous. Well, I wish you guys the best of luck on this performance and for next season.
Thank you so much.
And thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Thank you for
Thank you.
having us.